Hello, everyone.
Hey, Isaac.
Yeah, is it?
Hey, what's up, Mike? Did you get back from Amsterdam?
Yep. Got back Saturday afternoon.
Nice. How was it?
It was good. It was really good. When we get to the agenda, there was some interesting feedback on some of the projects like CI, like Salsa and some of the other stuff that we've been doing, and definitely areas we can improve on there. I know a lot of folks have been asking for some interesting stuff out of the OpenSSF.
Awesome. I think maybe we'll start there, and then because the other topic we could, it's going to take all of the available time, so I'm going to put that last, and we'll basically soak up whatever's left with that one. Let's give folks a couple of extra minutes to filter in, and we can get started. I'm very interested in Spectre, by the way, Mike. We need to chat about that at some point too.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Hey, Jay. Hey, Tim. Claudia, hi. Will, hi. All right, it's 10:03. I'm going to wait till 10:04, and then we'll kick off, and folks are going to filter in afterwards, and that's just fine. All right, 10:04. There we go. Let's begin. So I'm going to invite a couple of things. First of all, if you're here and you haven't yet added your name to the agenda, please do so, and just kind of note that you were here today. There's a little section in the doc that's linked in the meeting invite, where you can put your name so you're here on April 26th. And then also, I'm going to ask to see if we have anyone who's new to this meeting who'd like to introduce themselves. If you're new to the meeting and don't want to introduce yourself, that is also totally fine. But if you're here for the first time and want to say hi, now is your chance.
Hi, it's not my first time attending, but I'm about to start diving in a bit deeper in Salsa and elsewhere. My name is Matt Wood. I'm from Intel, and one of the main parts of my day job these days is evaluating how to implement Salsa within as a common framework within our software infrastructure. So yeah, I plan on engaging deeper in those forums.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, Matt. Could I ask you a quick question about that, just out of curiosity? Are you looking at that primarily driven by like insider risk, or are you looking at adoption of Salsa to have better assessment of upstream risk, or what's the overall motivation, I guess?
Part of it is to help us comply with some of the government mandates that are coming out, generation of evidence and so on. But in general, there's the goodness and light of making sure that what we expect to be built actually gets built. And being able to show that to our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you. That's super helpful. Sweet. Anyone else want to say hi here for the first time, or newish at these meetings? Nope. Okay. So we can progress. So we've got two top level items on the agenda today. One, Mike brings us news from Amsterdam. He comes with some insights and some feedback and some things which I think collectively would be useful for us to look at. Second item is the overall strategy or direction, I guess, or North Star for this group in 2023. But we'll come to that second. Mike, let's start with you, and I'll take notes as we go.
Cool. Yeah, so a couple of things. One was, hey, the Salsa 1.0 announcement went over very well. A lot of folks were super keen to hear that kind of came out. A lot of folks were like asking questions, because we were also doing a thing called the Security Village out there. And among a lot of the projects, a lot of folks were like, hey, have you heard of this Salsa thing? Because they heard like, hey, I do stuff with supply chain security. And I said, yes, I very much heard about this Salsa thing. And in fact, we just went 1.0, and so folks are very, very keen on seeing that, and seeing what kind of comes out of that. There's some additional stuff which I added into a GitHub issue under the Salsa thing. One is just that a lot of folks are a little confused about Salsa 1.0 examples and like where that might come in, and some stuff on that front that I think we should take a closer look at. One of the things that was brought up was like, hey, are there any Salsa 1.0 compliant tools? Some of that's still being built out. There was also some questions around which I think we just need to do a better job on, which is like a lot of folks are worried that like Salsa only supports SaaS builds, which it doesn't, but I think they're looking at like, hey, why is everything on GitHub right now?
Right.
And they, I mean, they do see tools like Fresca, but then they say, hey, I think there's like some sort of middle ground between like this big thing like Fresca and something that is just like a SaaS like GitHub. And so some chatter around that, which also this is something that I'm personally working on as an open source project for the future. So that was some stuff. Another thing that came out was CNCF announced Salsa audits. This was for the V0.1. They did say 1.0 when they had announced the audit. 1.0 hadn't gone live yet. It was, I guess, on the Wednesday morning, a little bit before 1.0 went live.
Right.
So, but they did a V0.1 audit of Prometheus and Argo through the CNCF. They're looking to do more of those audits, and in fact, want to partner with both Tag Security to help define like that policy of like, yeah, all projects should be built through Salsa, let's say. All CNCF projects should be built through Salsa or something like that. They're looking for that sort of information, and how to include a lot of the stuff that's coming out of OpenSSF, like S2C2F, Salsa, some of the other like best practices, scorecard, yada yada, and make those as suggestions for CNCF projects, since we know that CNCF projects tend to be more tooling focused projects, and OpenSSF is a little bit more geared towards like frameworks, white papers, best practices. And they are also looking to partner with OSTIF, which is also under the Linux Foundation, as the conduit for how audits get paid for, which I think OSTIF is like the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund or Innovation Fund, something like that. Another thing that came up, and this is sort of feedback for some of the S2C2F folks, there seemed to, folks have heard of S2C2F, but they're unsure a little bit of where it fits in. And then some folks had also started to point out that some of the documentation, I'm sure it's just a typo, it's not on purpose, still refers to like S2C2F as like Microsoft S2C2F as opposed to OpenSSF S2C2F. And there's some concern, there's some confusion also about how like much of it is an OpenSSF project versus a Microsoft project, given that like the maintainers are all Microsoft folks. And also some of the links seem to incorrectly point to Microsoft/OSS SSC framework. So there's some stuff there. I'm sure that can kind of be sorted out, but that's some feedback I had gotten on that from a few folks. And then separately, there's also a desire for the OpenSSF to take a larger part in helping define end-to-end supply chain security. One of the things that was brought up was some folks aren't ready for cloud native adoption yet and want to better understand and how to secure supply chain outside of cloud native tools. So that's why, a lot of folks are saying, hey, there's a tool like Kyverno, which is policy, but that only works inside of Kubernetes. OPA can work outside of Kubernetes, but like they want to see more of that. And that's, I had brought up, hey, there's some work happening on the Sterling toolchain side. I know that's still being built out. There's a couple of documents that are out there. They're also asking for more diagrams and where sort of supply chain integrity fits in. I know that the diagrammers working group is working on some stuff, but I think folks are like looking for a little bit more of like a white paper, that kind of thing. And then there's also, it's unclear if/when SCI will focus more on tooling some folks are like, hey, are there going to be any tools that come out of the supply chain integrity working group, or at least suggestions of tools or something like that? Because I think it really does sound like folks are a little bit lost when it comes to actually implementing the practices that are coming out of this group.
Got it. That makes sense. And I mean, let me ask you this. I mean, is it this group specifically, or is it kind of OpenSSF? Like, I think we talked about this question before. Like, kind of how should we frame or conceptualize kind of the overall approach to tools? Like, should we have a salsa tooling group? Should we have an SCI tooling group, or should there be an overall OpenSSF tooling group? I mean, in fact, there may already be one, and if so, what are they doing, and so on.
Yeah, so there is a couple of different groups that are working on different tools in different contexts. So I think that's still good. I think that there's, this is where, like, I think some of that cross group pollination should happen a bit more. Because I know that there is, I think that there is, like, for example, there's like, OpenSSF scorecard.
Right.
Is, and people were saying, hey, OpenSSF scorecard is great, but a lot of folks are like, what other tools are out there? And especially like command line tools and kind of more dev focused things. Because there's the security tooling working group. But I believe the security tooling working group isn't really working on, I guess it's probably worthwhile for me at this point to maybe do a little bit of a dive into the security tooling working group and see where we can cross-pollinate more on that end. Because I know that I think they're mostly like linking back to a bunch of tools that are working on this stuff. Yes. Yeah, but that's a good point. I'll definitely reach out to those folks.
Got it. Yes, and perhaps you could use some of your abundant free time to follow up on yet another thread. I mean, I think, and I kid, of course. I like this question has kept coming up, and I think it's worthwhile. At least, I mean, maybe it's worthwhile making it visible to the tag that we could use some overall guidance or kind of help with overall alignment as to how we think about tooling OpenSSF wide. There are various points efforts, in various other working groups. And so I know it's, we had the salsa tooling working group, and there was this question of should this actually be SCI tooling and should Fresco be a part of tooling and so on. I think that we should try and run this down and perhaps engage the tech in helping with this because I don't see this converging at the moment. I see it just continuing to roll along without much convergence. That's super interesting about S2C2F. Jay, do you, I mean, it sounds like we've got some fix-ups to do with links, but in terms of maintainers and Microsoft's involvement and kind of making this, more clearly an OpenSSF thing and less of a Microsoft thing, is that something that the S2C2F working group is looking at?
Absolutely. Reason why I keep bringing it up. We need more participation, more people diving in, more people getting involved. The meetings are open about these links and etc. I'm happy about that discovery, Mike, and it's because I've been systematically going through and finding places where we have a little bit of debt, right? We got a lot of stuff that's lagging from back in October and back in September and everything like that when we were trying to merge stuff over. So highlighting that stuff is important. Making sure that we're articulating everywhere that this is part of the OpenSSF, and I don't have any visibility on the team that actually puts this stuff in the public sphere. But when I see it and I catch it, I can reach out to those that do, and exactly right. People are reading it. People are. This is catching notice, but we need to do the right thing on making sure it's situated correctly, and it's not just a Microsoft thing. As I said before, getting all of the links and all of the what's out there in the sphere corrected, that's an easy fix, right? You can only see what you can only catch what you can see, right? Unless you're fishing, then you just toss a line out, which is you're the line, Mike. But with respect to community involvement. You have heard me say, and it'll be almost a year now, be a year and a couple of months. Hey, we're here, get involved. Let's do it. And hopefully everybody jumps on in. Now that we're full steam ahead with 1.0, and because we find, we found a clear path and clear parallel. We can identify gaps, and we can identify how one works with the other, how S2C2F will work with Salsa and vice versa, right? So there is a clear marriage between the two. So I feel like, more people join the meetings, more people get involved, more people contribute, more people on that maintainers list, which is absolutely where we'd like for this to go.
That makes sense. Thanks, Jay. And I think, whoever said I edited the notes, I think it is worthwhile to note that, hey, people finding nits to pick at in the docs is encouraging in the sense that people are looking at the docs. That's progress in itself. So there's something to celebrate there, even though we've got a little bit of fix up to do here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on anything that Mike brought back from Amsterdam, or any other thoughts generally on how Salsa 1.0 has landed in your communities and places around you?
Was that for me?
No, just generally for anyone here. Has anyone else got feedback from the community or from their companies, or any of the other chatter we've heard around 1.0 that they want to bring up?
Everyone's excited about it. I think especially those that saw Salsa back in about this time last year, back in June and July last year, and then seeing what 1.0 became as a result of all the hard work that was done separating the tracks and really drilling down to something that's not only that people can take in and read, but something that's actually usable and that they can apply to their builds, and they can apply to how they practice and what they do. We're getting great feedback so far. People are increasingly excited about it. But there is a concern around where the pending tracks are going to go, right? So how these tracks are going to get developed, and there's a bit of concern with that, whether or not the tracks themselves are going to take away from the current track. Are they going to add to, right? So both positive and negative risks are articulated. Risks nonetheless. Over time, I guess we can do a good job of explaining changes iteratively as they come up. But so far, I mean, the review and so far it's just nothing but positivity around 1.0.
That's great to hear. Great. I see a couple of hands up. I'm not sure who had their hand up first. Mike, maybe we'll start with you. You're both Mike. Mike Thompson. Maybe we'll start with you.
Hi there. Let's try this again. Awesome update on Salsa 1.0. I got to make my usual disclaimer. Sorry, everybody. Anything I discuss here are my opinions, not those of my employer yet. With that said, I was curious when we're going to see some of the stuff from Salsa 4 come back, namely the network isolation. Like that was my one concern with Salsa 1.0.
The hermeticity requirement was the big one that got removed. I mean, in Salsa level 4, I think it was sacrificed to pragmatism, but it's interesting that there's desire to see that back again. Mike, I know you've been closer to the spec work than I have. Do you have visibility into that?
Yeah. So I believe the main things were, so the reason why a lot of it was removed was what exactly hermeticity meant to different folks kind of was wildly there were a lot of issues with some of those requirements, and a lot of confusion on like how that might get done. And so even if we did sort of put the requirement out there, there was worry that it would just kind of like get lost in the mix, or that folks would keep sort of doing that. So the thing there is, like, I think very, very soon, you'll probably see something like a Salsa for draft come up very, very soon. I anticipate probably on the order of like weeks, not months. And it'll be in draft form for a while as folks kind of sort that out and sort out what hermeticity means and some of those other things. Some of the other tracks are also being sorted out, and I think the two ones that have been brought up time and again, and this actually came from some of the conversations at KubeCon as well, was the two main ones were source track, like two-person code review, bringing that back in, but as a separate track, so that folks recognize that you can have a secure build that just builds bad code. That's still something that's there, but keeping it separate so that folks who are focused on one piece can focus on that one piece. But yeah, so the source track is one of the big ones, two-person code review, sign commits, that kind of thing. And then the second piece is a secure build system itself. So a lot of folks are really asking, like, hey, I'm not using GitHub Actions. What are the things I should be doing to secure my build infrastructure, right? Because Salsa itself does talk about like a trusted build system. And right now we've been very broad about that. We're just sort of saying, hey, run that trusted build, run a build system securely, and following these sorts of parameters, like builds need to be isolated and those sorts of things, right? As long as it has those characteristics, that is good enough to be Salsa provenance. But folks are asking, okay, great, can you point me in the direction of how I would do that? Like what sorts of things, do you recommend doing in order to meet those requirements that are required for Salsa provenance? So those are the two big tracks that people have been asking for recently. And that work will probably start within the next few days as well.
So follow up to that, when I think of like network jailing, as we were discussing actually the Slack, getting like all your dependencies into one place, like I think we called it vendoring. I think that's a term from the Rust ecosystem, is vendoring, where you pre-compute all your dependencies and you put them in a place, and then you only read from that place. Doing that for all the language ecosystems is challenging. I would like to see us look at something like network isolation. Doesn't mean you can't reach out to the network. It means you can reach out to the network, but when you do so, it has to be metered, audited, that type of thing. So I'd like to see that nuance get in there. I'm happy to help contribute, because my second one was, how do I help contribute to that draft?
Sure. So feel free. So every Monday we have a Salsa specification meeting. That's kind of where a lot of that work starts. So I think usually like something like this will get brought up either as open up a GitHub issue and say, hey, here's this thing, or just on the Monday meeting, chat through some of those, like, hey, here's something I noticed, I'd like to sort of contribute to this. And somebody might say, okay, great, yeah, that's on the list, or we have that prioritized, or no, we hadn't thought about that, but if you're willing to write something up. So on Monday, that's kind of the meeting to bring that up in. And just to be clear, these are all like reasons why those things that you brought up are reasons why we had removed the hermeticity requirement originally, is because we wanted to make sure that that definition was like super crystal clear, so that we included all those things you talked about, because these are all things that we also truly, we believe as well, of like, hey, the hermeticity thing is more like, it's more about the dependencies you think you're pulling in are the dependencies you did pull in, and that's it. Right? You didn't pull something in without actually recording it. You didn't pull something in without knowing what it was. You actually pulled in exactly what you said you were pulling in. And that sort of thing is like, in certain cases, it's just, hey, I downloaded everything beforehand and then I give it to the build. Sometimes that might be, what you described of like, I'm calling out to the network, but it's all audited. Like I don't have direct access to the internet. I only have access to the things that are already allowed and that sort of thing, whether it's like through a Artifactory or Nexus proxy or whatever. I think those sorts of things are things that we're looking to kind of, make a lot more crystal clear to folks so that they understand when they look at the hermeticity requirement, what that actually means.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think Mike, and I mean, that's it's a really good point. That I think the hermeticity requirement was kind of thought of as a solution to a set of problems without the problems being particularly well articulated or investigated. And I think actually, if you take a close look at like what are you actually solving for, you begin to go, well, actually, we can solve for those things without having a completely, isolated, no network access environment. But perhaps metering or whitelisting or logging or at least we have observability into what is going on, and then the idea that in the process of this build, the bill can decide to reach out the internet for arbitrary artifacts ad hoc. That's certainly something which we don't want to allow. But there's plenty of network access which is non-threatening in nature and perhaps needs to be within the boundaries here. And with the idea of hermetic to your environment, like hermetic to your organization, hermetic to your company, or hermetic to your build system and your artifact registry, or whatever that looks like. To Mr. Lieberman's point, there's some nuance there which needs to be better articulated in the spec. That's super good feedback, though, Mike. Thank you. Anyone else with comments on Salsa before we move on to the SCI vision? Okay, with that, let's move on and let's see if I can actually. I'm kind of I'm juggling various devices here, so I'm trying to figure out if I can project this thing while I'm on my. Yeah, I think I can. So let me try and share my screen here. Okay, do folks see this document? It's linked in the agenda if you want to just go to directly access, but I thought I'd throw it up so we can all make sure we're looking at the same parts. Is this visible to you all?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So I've been through, so this document has been kind of circulating for the last few months. There was, when I first shared it in December, there was a whole bunch of comments coming in December and January. I've been through in the last couple of weeks and kind of gone through all of that feedback, incorporated it, put placeholders for where I didn't have ready answers. But this is a relatively clean document right now with, with still some areas where I think there's more thought required, but at least it represents, I think, the closest thing that we have to consensus. One thing that I added yesterday, which we didn't have, was trying to articulate exactly what problem we're solving. And this is, again, like the context of this is the OpenSSF Supply Chain Integrity Working Group. And so this is independent of what products we happen to have on our shelves today in the way of Salsa or S2C2F or Fresco or whatever. This is thinking about what should the OpenSSF Supply Chain Integrity Working Group be focused on when we think about what problem are we trying to solve. And there's a lot of problems we could go solve, right? I mean, organizations have problems and the industry has problems and the government has problems and software producers have compliance problems and software consumers have risk problems. And so I think part of the challenge that we have is narrowing that scope down. And my proposal, where I ended up, is this problem statement here, which is that it's hard or impossible for those depending on externally supplied software components to make statements about their inherent security properties or derived properties from security-related practices, which we use in their production. So this is a consumer-focused problem. And the reason I ended up here is because, A, I think that we need to start on solving one problem for one stakeholder and start there rather than trying to solve everything for everyone. And also recognizing that, if you look at open source, for example, there isn't an open source maintainer in the world that wakes up in the morning wishing they could have an additional security framework or more work to do, or, hey, help add, more requirements on my plate of practices that need to be followed. So I think that Salsa is solving, and again, like I own Salsa as kind of an exemplar here rather than supply chain integrity, but I feel like the pain today of supply chain integrity, the challenge, is really borne by the consumers of software, not the producers. And that's partly structural. I think that, the US government would like to shift that. They've been moved towards software liability. And maybe when software producing organizations are liable for security defects, maybe they'll have a set of problems which are more acute and urgent, which we might want to solve. But right now, I think that the more pressing problem and the more readily articulable one, and the one that is felt more urgently, is on those consuming software. And so the supply chain integrity problem tends to be borne by those who are consuming from something upstream and are in a position of not being able to reason about or measure or manage or mitigate or reduce the risk that they're ingesting as they rely on externally supplied components. And so I think if we want to solve this problem, we will be led to solutions which have implications for other actors. And so, SALSA as a partial solution to this problem has implications for software producers. And hopefully recognizing that software producers are not particularly incentivized to solve this problem because they're not feeling the pain, I think that leads to principles like, if we scroll down to principles where we aim to disappear into the infrastructure layer. If software producers have to invest or commit to a lot to adopt SALSA or S2C2F, we're probably not going to get much adoption. And so, but if we make it so that all common tools, CI/CD systems, build systems, policy systems out there already have support for the frameworks we're building, it becomes next to free to adopt for many software producers. Again, it leads to principles like targeting the technical infrastructure as a point of leverage, anchoring trust in tools and systems, not processes and people, and so on. So I've added a little bit to this document, and I don't think it's going to be productive to try and review the whole thing top to bottom live, but I'd love to get feedback or at least kind of initial reactions on this problem statement here, because I think that if we can agree on, again, like at a SCI working group level and kind of, putting what we happen to have on the truck today, as in SALSA, Fresca, and S2C2F, putting that aside and just thinking about, if we had nothing and we're starting the SCI working group today, what problem would we begin to try to solve? I think it would be this one. And I'd love to hear if there are other opinions.
Yeah, this is great. I think to take a step back, I think that and I don't know how we want to prioritize it. I think generally, you hit the nail on the head on a lot of it. If I go back to some of the stuff that myself, I've done, and some of the other folks I've been working with have done on sort of trying to figure out who are the folks we want to most help to begin with. Because it turns out everybody has slightly different needs, or different prioritization around the needs, I should say. Like everybody has these needs, it's just around how important is it for them. And this is something that's been brought up as part of also the Sterling tool chain and some of the other work is, if we take a step back and look at the problem and how it gets solved a little bit, right? You're going to have a lot of these larger enterprises that are going to say, hey, I'm going to hire a large like a larger bank, let's say, is going to hire a large consultancy to help fix this. They might say, please implement SALSA, please implement, S2C2F and these other things. But one of the things that was brought up, which I found very interesting, is that same large enterprise that wants to, that's how they secure their own supply chain. They want to use software by smaller manufacturers as well, but it's hard for them to do that when those smaller, producers of software are unable to, let's say, hit the high level of requirement that they might have, like hey, in order for us to hit SALSA and get a SALSA audit and do all this stuff, that's the majority of our budget, right? Before we even start writing the features. And so that's kind of one of the things that was brought up by a few folks was, hey, anything we could also do to help out those smaller producers of software who are not like security experts in easily adopting S2C2F, Fresca, SALSA, I should say, Salsa, the various things like scorecard and all the other best practices that are coming out of this, the better it is for everyone at large, because then those smaller, producers of software can then be used by larger ones, and then it all sort of flows down. That was something that was kind of brought up in a couple of the meetings, was just like, how do you bring those folks along who are like, hey, I have a million things on my plate. Quantifying, risk and reasoning about it and yada yada is not on my list of things to do.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I mean, I actually just literally earlier this morning had a conversation with folks here at Google who are in the business of vendor security assessments and looking at how we bring in third-party software. And yeah, I think there are software organizations who produce great products who would provide great value, but like to your point, it's an enormous burden trying to meet the requirements of a mega corp like a Google or a finance organization who have these incredibly strict requirements. It can just be prohibitively expensive to meet those requirements in order to get your first sale to a company that size. I think I'm going to make a note of that in the notes. I think that's definitely a good point. Tim, you mentioned you were scanning down and this. Oh, sorry, Mike. I just saw you got your hands up.
So I was just reflecting on the what you said about the open source maintainer. No open source maintainer wants to wake up and be like, "Oh, great, something else I have to do." One of the challenges that I've personally found with open source is you go clone the repo and you say maven build or make or whatever the build command is, and the build immediately fails. And there's no, like, you go to the contributing doc and it just says run this. It doesn't say, okay, you need this JDK on this distro and here's how you build this thing. I'm wondering if another avenue is, hey, open source maintainers, if you don't want to, if you are unable to, or for whatever reason you can't comply with this, give the consumers the ability to take the software and build it in their own defined environment.
Yes.
Would that be an optional out, for lack of a better term?
I think yes, and I think, and I was thinking about it yesterday as I was working on this doc, that I think in some cases, like being able to say, this open source has solved the provenance. If we can get there without even involving the maintainer, you can still solve the problem. And so, again, like not wanting to expose my bias too much, but Google has this product assured open source where for given open source packages, you may find that Google has rebuilt it on Google's own infrastructure and has provided salsa provenance for this package. And so it could be that we can meet the goals of supply chain integrity without requiring the software originator to do the work of the attestation. It could be that there's an intermediary or third party or trusted rebuilder. It could even be that we want to stand up an open source rebuilding as a service. To your point, Mike, but maybe there's an opportunity for an open source maintainer to just say, go build it over there, and you can get your salsa provenance directly. Would be a neat way to get around this or deliver against the problem without requiring the maintainer to invest a lot.
There may be something a little more specific, rather than saying, you know what, hey, come, just let this thing of like Google trusted source. I mean, the Google trusted source thing is cool. I'm not trying to knock it. But rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to ingest, hey, open source maintainers, I'm going to ingest your stuff and I'm going to supply it. I'm going to vend it for you. If they just simply said, you know what, here's how you build this package. Mm-hmm. Then a bank or someone could be like, you know what, I'm not going to use Google open source. I'm not going to use Circle CI. I'm going to use my own internal thing. Mm-hmm. Are able to do that. And so the open source maintainer just has to provide, here's how you build this thing.
Yep.
I mean,
go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please. You've had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I can't remember if it's one of the groups underneath the OpenSSF has been talking about this sort of thing as well. I think the thing is that sort of thing is just, that should already be table stakes for an open source project. Like if you are running builds and you are not also providing the ability to run those builds in some way, right? Like, a make file, a build script, or whatever, right? Some way to pull down dependencies, then you're not really not really complete, right? And in fact, for a lot of folks, that should raise red flags. If, hey, I looked at your source, I tried to run the build script and it didn't work because it's missing all these things, that should be, generally suspicious to begin with. I just think that, like, I think the thing there is generally, yeah, I think that's a good best practice that should be sort of maybe even something like a salsa practice, right? Of saying, hey, if it is an open source project, the build script should be, runnable by, should be self-contained and runnable. Like, it should not require external unknown inputs before being able to run. If that makes sense.
I think that's a great idea, that it should be definable. We should also, like, I imagine Google, when y'all were building your, sorry, I forget the name of the product now. The secure
Assured open source.
Yes, assured open source. My apologies. I imagine when y'all were building that, you had to create custom build recipes and had to do debugging and get some of these packages to build. Did y'all reach out, like, back to the open source maintainers of various projects and say, hey, why is it this way? Like, I imagine that there's not malintent here. I was just curious if we asked them.
It's a good question. I don't have the answer to that at hand, but I would also be super curious, and I can try and find out. And I think, I mean, the other interesting thing, and speaking generally about this space, I think part of the problem that Assured Open Source and others like it are trying to solve is there's an accountability gap in the ecosystem here. It's not just about the technical capability to build with provenance, but the idea that, if I'm, I don't know, Citibank, and I'm depending on these 100 open source packages, I want someone to stand up for their security. I want someone to say, yes, we're gonna, make these as secure as possible. And when you report bugs to us, we'll give you an SLO and all this kind of stuff. And at the moment, the open source ecosystem, isn't well set up to deliver that accountability to large enterprises who want, a single throat to choke, or they want to be able to file bugs and get them fixed. And so there's kind of an overall, open source sustainability, incentives, economics problem to be solved here as well. And I think Assured Open Source is Google saying, well, hey, we'll step in and we'll be a supplier of record for these packages. And hey, if you've got a problem with them, you can come and scream at us. Potentially, there are other solutions to this problem too. But I've heard that this general notion that there is an accountability gap between what enterprises want to consume and how far up the stack open source can reach in general, if that makes sense. I mean, Red Hat has obviously made an entire business out of stepping into this gap too. Jonathan, you got your hand up.
As regarding table stakes of being able to build a project from source just by checking it out, I would challenge anybody who thinks that the case, go to any project that's written by the Apache Software Foundation and is using Ant to build it, and go try to build it from scratch. Having run into these problems, right, especially when you get big projects, right, like you run into projects that are like, Gradle or the JetBrains IDE, and like all of a sudden you need 3 different versions of the Java JDK installed on your machine in order to build the thing, because they have to cross compile. And like, if you don't have the right environment variable set, the whole thing comes crashing down around you. And like, it's all written down in a README that you got to set up your environment the right way. Like, I think the assumption that that's actually how the world works is, if you actually try to check out open source projects and try to use them, it's sometimes a slog to get your environment set up correctly.
It's
Yeah,
a good
no,
point.
no,
It's also-
I totally. Also, sorry, I was just gonna say, yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the idea is it should be table stakes. I know it, like, it by no means is it, but I think that, you know, for a lot of folks who are looking at this sort of stuff, the fact that, you know, yeah, I can't go in and even though a lot of these things are open source, but they require me to own random hardware or whatever, all of a sudden that becomes much more difficult. And it also, I think it sort of begins to raise red flags around, like, hey, how would I know whether or not something is potentially malicious or dangerous if I can't even really run the build myself, right? Yeah.
I was just going to make the observation actually that I think it's a SLSA level 1 requirement is a scripted build itself, right? I mean, and that itself is a nod to the fact that not all open source builds are, you know, readily scripted and automated already, and some of them require you poking around in your IDE to get them done.
What defines a scripted build, right? Like, is that like you must be able to run a single script to build the whole thing, which includes installing all dependencies in the JDK and like all that stuff? Or is it like, can that scripted build assume certain dependencies to be present on the system prior to running that?
That is a great question. I'm literally looking up salsa.dev/requirements right now to answer that. All build scripts are fully defined in some sort of build script. The only manual command, if any, is to invoke the build script. Example being make all.
That does not seem to conclude in scope that you like having a JDK or having Python installed. It's like the script is not going to do that for you.
Right.
The right version of Python.
There's an implicit assumption around prerequisites here, which is kind of hands are waved. Yeah, I think that's a fair observation, Jonathan. Any other thoughts on this? And in general, around this, the supply chain integrity vision document, in terms of what I hope to do next. I mean, it sounds like nobody's looked at the problem and gone, oh my God, that's completely off base and you're forgetting X, Y, and Z important thing, which is good. I recognize that there could yet be some refinement to do. There may be some things, perspectives that others may have or more thought may reveal problems with it. But my intent with this document, now it's kind of cleaner, is to go through. I'll highlight some of the new sections so people who've seen it before can kind of just review what's new, circulate it in the community. I think we talked about passing this up to the TAC to review as well and say, hey, you know, the SCI working group, we're trying to reboot it. You know, since we last had its charter, we've we've had SLSA v1 launch, we've had S2C2F join the thing, we've had movement on Fresca, and we need to kind of reconceptualize or reframe what SCI working group is about in OpenSSF, and this document is our current best articulation of that. And so what I'll probably do is post on the mailing list and in Slack a call to review this thing, another round of comments and feedback incorporated, and then with one more nod from this group in the meeting, probably pass it up to the TAC to review. Any thoughts on that as proposed next steps? Okay, I'm going to take that as no.
I like
okay.
it. I felt somebody needed to say something. I like it. I like it a lot.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right, cool. Well, that, in fact, is actually probably a great place to end. We're at the bottom of the agenda. We've got a great encouraging and positive comment. I will post a summary of this meeting in Slack. I'll also circulate this doc as discussed. We'll meet again in 2 weeks, and maybe we'll have something which we can all agree is TAC ready, and get this formalized as part of the new charter for this working group. Thanks all. Great to see you all. Mike, great to have you here. I hope we'll see you again in this meeting, and continued presence, and really definitely look forward to your help with the spec around hermeticity. And if you need, ping me on Slack or on email if you need pointers to the spec working group for that. And yeah, great to have you involved.
Thanks.
Cheers all.
Bye.